And what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Designated Players Podcast. In what's been a tough week for MLS with public backlash at what seems to be every turn, it is our time to speak with level heads, facts, and lay out information to find the best path forward from our point of view. First, MLS, after teasing changes for weeks on end, under-delivered on expectations and kept roster rules relatively the same. And on the very next day, MLS made a nearly unprecedented decision to withdraw all of its first teams from the historic US Open Cup. What do these changes mean? Who do they impact the most? And why make them in the first place? All that and more on this episode of the Designated Players Podcast. Connor, how you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you doing?
I'm I don't know. Twitter's been making me pretty sad recently. Not gonna lie.
Twitter makes you sad every time you're on Twitter.
It does, but this
You
one this
always tell
one's
yourself you're not going to go on Twitter, and then here you are, always on Twitter.
yeah, but this one I had to because we got 10K impressions and 250 likes on a tweet.
And that's what it's all about.
I mean, listen, we're massive, but in reality, right, we've got some pretty hefty things to talk about here. That um, one of the non-viral tweets I put out, because we're basically viral now. This past week is going to be looked back in 5 years as a massive turning point in U.S. soccer. I truly believe, in terms of the landscape of what we're doing, in terms of the all the steps that we took to make this league not as hated as it used to be, seems to have taken a very big step back. We'll dive into all of that, but first, I do want to ask you what you've got for Scarf of the Week.
Well, fitting if we're going to talk about US Open Cup, and who knows, maybe the last time we ever see an MLS team in US Open Cup, maybe go with the last ever potential champions, the
Oh,
Houston Dynamo.
it's a good one. I broke out the lowest tiered team in my Scarf collection. I've got a Providence City FC, which I believe, to my knowledge, is either USL 2 or even amateur division. Um, Big ups, mystery scarf, because came through with this one. Definitely one of the teams that is affected by this decision. Before we get into the U.S. Open Cup, I do want to run through just some of the roster rule changes that we've seen over the last couple of days. So, just for recapping, the last Thursday, by the time you guys are listening to this, MLS Board of Governors met to discuss some possible changes to the roster rules to take advantage of the new audience and money created by the arrival of one Lionel Messi. When Messi was signed, the Inter Miami CF owner Jorge Mas came out with a teasing quote: "Evolution is inevitable and change is likely." When somebody goes out and spends this type of money and then says change is coming, people get excited. Unfortunately, the people who got excited were people from Twitter, who then blew it up and made it sound like every team was about to go spend like a Premier League team. Um, that's at the most extreme level, and even at the lowest levels, you're looking at TAM increases. The rumor of a fourth DP was out there. You're looking at a whole bunch of different things. The fourth DP was taken off the table. Paul Tenorio at The Athletic wrote this whole story about what to actually expect. Don Garber hinting that the league was going to take a massive step into 2027. That was kind of the goal year. And the whole article is about how the product strategy committee, the PSC, was thinking about every way that the league can move forward. Again, leading to beliefs of some GAM or TAM increases, the decoupling of the U22 to DP rule, large salary cap increases, or even taking away the purchase or the salary of a designated player from the purchase, I believe was one of the other ones that came out. Instead, we got changes that even the most diehard MLS fans looked at with confusion. The chance of a TAM increase was not even brought to a vote by the board. And at the end of the day, they walked out deciding that these changes will be made. First, a decrease in the number of players a team can have discovery rights on from 7 to 5. Secondly, a designated player transfer that goes out can now have some of that money turned into GAM instead of just transfer fee into the club's pocket. And finally, a change in the deadline for when a player must have U.S. residency interview to become a domestic player. That's it. Underwhelming to say the least, but I do want to ask you, Connor, because I've been waffling here a little bit. What are your thoughts on this decision? Is it not enough? What in your eyes would have been an acceptable change after this meeting on Thursday?
Look, you and I have been very defensive of this league and its financial format for a long time now. However, this, I think, is something that you and I even can both agree on as well, was a massive missed opportunity for them. I'm not saying they needed to, beat the brakes off this thing and just, open the floodgates. Everybody can spend whatever they want. Clearly, that's not the right way to go. But they did nothing. They made no improvement, virtually no improvement at all to their financial situation, where obviously, there's things we're going to talk about in a little bit. But prior to that, they were in potentially, 4 or 5 competitions throughout the year. And you're going to, you continue to add competitions that teams are going to play in, and then gave them no extra money to build out the rest of the squad. So you're asking them to play 50 plus games a season potentially. I mean, maybe even 60. I mean, I want to say, technically it's best case scenario, but best case scenario, a team could probably even hit 60 games in a season. And you've given them no extra money to build out that team. So you're essentially saying that you have to rely on this small amount of money that used to be sufficient for most teams who really only had to deal with MLS Cup regular season, potentially MLS Cup playoffs, and US Open Cup. And now you got to balance out 2 or 3 more competitions on top of that with an expanded CCL, Leagues Cup, and they have Campeones Cup, but I think that's only one team. I don't really know, whatever. Campeones Cup just pops up every once in a while, and I have no idea how people qualify or what's going on. But I'm going to count it because it helps towards my point. It was extremely disappointing. I didn't care about them having a 4th EP or not. That would have been great. I would have been happy with that, obviously. But if they didn't go with it, which they obviously didn't, I would have totally been fine with that. But an absolutely huge missed opportunity to not let teams build out their squads with more depth, more TAM GAM, whatever combination is needed in order to get teams to be deeper.
I think it's a fair point, right? Especially when they keep throwing these things on. There were lots of ways that they could have gone about fixing this, and that increase would have been from a playing standpoint. It makes sense. I'm going to go into it a little bit in the future here about what it really means to not have it in terms of what I think everybody was expecting. But I do want to say that it actually doesn't do a lot for me. It's underwhelming, 100%, because of how hyped things were. But the big changes for this league don't come before the World Cup. It comes after. And you have all these eyes on America with Copa America, with World Cup. You're going to bring more and more eyes to your product. Not before then, though. People aren't watching this and saying, "Oh man, I can't wait to see the World Cup in the United States. Let me watch what they're doing right now." So really, you're just spending money without an increased revenue. You're taking a loss. And if you can hold off for 1 year to get away with it, you get away with it. And that's really what I think happened here. And that doesn't do a lot for me. I don't think that moves the needle a ton. I would have expected something in terms of actual spending. So the DP to GAM transition, I think, is actually a good one. It allows you for a little bit more roster flexibility when DPs are transfer out instead of just pocketing money to buy more designated players. It is a roundabout way of increasing mid-level spending. Again, the people who don't understand MLS roster rules don't see it that way, and I understand completely. I'm actually really glad they didn't do the 4th DP because, as I just mentioned, we don't really need more top level spending. We see what happens when teams just go out and spend money to spend money. My friends in Chicago would agree. But we do need more mid-level spending. So if there was anything that was going to change, that's what it would have happened. So I'm glad they didn't do the 4th DP. They could have bumped up TAM or GAM just to allow that sort of mid-level spending. But again, I'm not super upset with it, mainly because the increase that people wanted to see is coming anyway. The CBA is going to bump this stuff up or down. TAM is decreasing because they're trying to weed that out of the spending mechanisms. But it's coming. People don't want to wait that long or whatever, fine, but it's not going to end the world, right? People are out there screaming, "Oh my God, unserious league. I'm not watching this league because they're not." No, you're not. The people who were screaming their heads off, for the most part, 95% of them are people who have never seen an MLS game in their life, and they were pretending that, oh, if MLS opened these roster rules, maybe I would have joined in, but they wouldn't have, right? That price is going to be the same now as the target goal at 2027. It was going to move it up 2 years. We're going to be fine. My other question to you, I've got a couple here. And I kind of hinted at my feelings about this, but in your opinion, is this lack of changing, are we setting MLS back?
I feel like the way I was trying to think about this earlier today, and maybe I'm not looking at this right, but I feel like the way I look at it is it's like imagine you're like in the airport. You're trying to get to your gate on time for your flight or something, Let's just say your airport gate is 2027, right? That's what MLS is always talking about. And those little conveyor belt things to make you walk a little bit faster in the airport and whatnot. That's what I would consider to be like the financial changes. So you're still going to be able to get to your gate to get to 2027 without having to add in these financial incentives. So no, to answer your question, I don't think it sets them backwards. However, I think it could have helped get you to that point faster. And I understand that there's some risks with that, but I feel like with Messi coming in, that is a serious bump and an opportunity, especially with stuff leading up, to take a little bit more risk. Because we can talk about these changes that are going to come in 2027, but this whole massive stretch of eyes that are going to be on the US and potentially eyes that kind of sweep over into MLS is going to be done by then. Eyes will be gone. It doesn't mean that like someone who's watching the World Cup in the US is now going to stick around and watch MLS all of a sudden in 2027. I think you got to capitalize on it now with stuff like Messi and Copa America coming in here to get the eyes, I would say, ahead of that. Get people familiar with the league and the players playing here before those things happen. And you might be able to keep them around after it happens. I don't think they're going to be able to translate eyes as easily when all that stuff is done in 2027. I mean, maybe you have a differing opinion, and I definitely would like to hear it, but I just don't think waiting that long to make change is the right idea.
I actually do have a differing opinion, but first I want to say that airport analogy, spot on. That is such a good way to think about it. Just wanted to give you credit there because we fight more than we compliment, but you deserve a little tip of the hat there, sir.
Wow, thank you.
Historic
day.
I agree with you. I don't think this sets MLS back. I use the phrase we didn't move the needle forward or backward with this decision, right? You had the small group of angry anti-MLS Twitter heads blowing up about how the league doesn't take itself seriously, so no one's going to watch and blah, 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 blah. Stuff that we see on a daily basis anyway. It was just like a little bit louder, for lack of a better term. At the end of the day, you need one single hand, 5 fingers, to count the number of people who woke up, saw the news, and said, I'm not watching MLS anymore because the U22 rule is still dependent on which type of DPs you have. Right? Like nobody woke up and read those rule changes and was like, oh my God, MLS is so unserious because they're still doing X, Y, and Z that 95% of people don't even know. Like, it didn't set anything back. You have the people who are screaming on Twitter, and they're all anti-MLS anyway. You didn't lose anything. Contrary to your point about trying to capitalize now before Messi leaves, the changes that were proposed, or hinted at or whatever would not have, in my opinion, capitalized on. And this is what I was kind of alluding to before, where everybody's talking about the changes that wanted to be made to capitalize on Messi. The changes that were being proposed were not capitalizing on Messi. It was for what we were just talking about, making teams more competitive through deeper competition. It wasn't taking advantage of Superstar and the eyes that he brought. And I think that's a really big distinction that people tend to mistake here, is every change has to be tied to Messi. And that's not the case. Any change in TAM would have gotten you a mid-level name that either one, nobody's ever heard of before, and it would have been like, oh, well, it's not insert European star here. Or two, is old, washed up, and somebody you might have pulled from a FIFA 14 pack once in your life. And you've been like, oh, yeah, I remember that name, but now MLS is a retirement league, and I'm not going to, right? Those changes that were proposed were not going to take advantage of Messi, right? They were going to make teams better, sure. But the people who are like, oh my God, Messi's eyes are here and we won't even change any of the salary rules, nothing that was proposed is going to make that change, right? Like, keep attendance here. That's the biggest thing that you're looking to do with Messi. You're not looking to do anything other than keep attendance and keep eyes. Raising TAM by $2 million doesn't get you anybody who's going to stick around because they only came to watch Messi. Like, I don't know how that conclusion came to be, but here we are. And that's where it comes to my last point. Are we missing out on a window of opportunity, something that you kind of alluded to? And honestly, I don't think so. I don't think this specific decision misses out on anything to the general fan. You've got your anti-MLSers who were going to consider watching if you raise the salary cap, or are no longer going to consider MLS a serious league until they start spending $40 million per every median level. Whatever, dude. Like, I don't care. Here's the deal. If we get through 2027 with Copa America, World Cup 26, and we still don't have any ideas other than just move along as needed, then people have a right to raise the red flag and start complaining and stuff, right? That is when we have the issue. If we are here and we've gotten all of these eyes now, not just from one player, but from two major international tournaments, and you're still not looking to capitalize on stuff like that, then we're in trouble. But 2 mil increase does not bring in people who Messi fans only are thinking about sticking around to watch after Messi's gone. I don't know how to get that through to people because everybody's blinded by rage, but I hate to break it to you, but 2 million increase in TAM and GAM doesn't get you a high level DP that's gonna keep people around forever and a day. It gets you mid-level roster guys who are gonna help roster rotation and competitions in deep cuts. That's my take on it. I'm totally happy to hear if you do think we're missing on a window. I know you mentioned it before. If you do think we're missing out and you think I'm totally wrong, I'm happy to hear it. I just don't really see the validity and stuff like that.
I think that's a really good point. I think increasing the TAM GAM maybe was like something that, excites you and I. Does it excite the Messi fan that's coming over to watch Messi play? And probably that's about it. I highly doubt it. They will have no idea who any of these players are. Exactly to your point. I am just concerned that they are kind of just pushing everything off until all this stuff is done and just being like, we're going to figure it out in 2027 when things are already done. I would have liked to see them kind of gradually get to that point. So we're not just getting to 2027 and then either one, I'm going to have like extremely underwhelming change, or two, we're just going to like rip the Band-Aid off way too much and just like let things explode. And then, I mean, who knows what could happen from there? I mean, there's obviously things could go well, but I think there's potential for a lot of bad things as well if we just kind of rip the Band-Aid off in 2027 and just let teams go do whatever they want. I would have rather seen them kind of gradually get to there, maybe little bits of increase to build the depth over the years. And then maybe 2027 is where you kind of focus on maybe building the more like reputable players, like getting them more involved. Maybe that's when you introduce the fourth DP, or maybe that's where you are able to. I mean, I don't. It's hard to come up with suggestions with these
Sure,
roster
sure.
rules, but um, I mean that could be like a reasonably good opportunity, especially if players are now playing in these tournaments in the U.S. You know, they're getting a little bit familiar with what it's like playing in the US, the travel, the weather, whether or not they like being here. Maybe some guys come over for the first time for the World Cup and they're like, "Hey, like, where I was here for a couple weeks, but this place seems really cool. Like this is an opportunity. Like maybe this is something I want to explore down the line now." Or, maybe it's someone who's like ready to make a move now and they're like, "Hey, really liked my time here. I would love for a chance to come play here now." But maybe that's the time where you go really try to like bring in the star level talent that gets more eyes on it. Because to your exact point before, I don't think increasing the TAM GAMs getting more eyes on the game, but I think it increases the overall quality. And maybe over time that's something that helps get more eyes
Right.
on the league.
And it's always going to be a slow stepwise process. It's always how this league has been. It's always how it's going to be on, for at least another 50 years. I just like I don't I understand like I'm trying to phrase this properly. You could have made any change that wasn't take everything off and just let it be a free flowing open market. And majority of the people who were pissed off on Thursday would still be pissed off today. Like it's just another thing to be upset about. So I move on from there and don't think it's a massive change, but do hope that there are plans in place. Because if there aren't, then we're in trouble. However, the Board of Governors meeting also brought along some rule changes that we're going to see in 2024. All VAR decisions will be made or announced, I should say, in the stadium over the PA system. Second, the clock in the stadium will now be continuous into stoppage time. So it doesn't just stop at 90 and say +6, and then you're guessing. The MLS Next Pro injury rule that they implemented before coming to MLS, if a player is on the ground with an injury, real or not, for more than 15 seconds, the ref will stop play, wave the medical crew on to evaluate the player, and the player must stay off for 2 minutes before returning to play. Fourth, time substitution rules. If you're not off the pitch within 10 seconds of that sub board being flashed by any point of the field, the sub that's supposed to be coming onto the field is held for 60 seconds and will enter at the next stop. So you can't take 25 seconds to get off the field, win the ball back, and then just boot it out of play, and now he's in. He's got a full minute to wait before the next restart. And then finally, return to play equity. If two players go down with a head injury, they will both re-enter at the same time once they have both been cleared to play. And I guess one by one, let's just go through and share our thoughts on this. I mean, there's not too much to dive into, but what are your thoughts on that first one about VAR decisions being made in stadium announcements?
It reminds when I was reading that in the article, I was laughing because I was like, this feels so American football. It's like the refs getting on the PA system being like, "The call on the field stands." And then the crowd starts cheering or booing. That's the only thing I thought of when I read the VAR thing. I just imagine someone reading over the VAR decision on the whatever PA system and people will be upset or whatever on it. But I guess it gives a little bit more transparency to the people in the stadium. Obviously, the people watching at home have like a lot more views and you get to hear from the commentators. But when you're in the stadium, I guess it's a bit more unclear at times. So I definitely think it's a good thing to add in, but probably not a major thing either.
Yeah, for me, it didn't really make any big, like, oh man, I can't wait. Some people love it, and I do understand why. Um, the end of the Red Bull FCC match was super confusing when we were there in person. We didn't know if he called a foul. We didn't know if he went to, had VAR in his ear. We didn't know any. So it is a nice little bit of clarity. Everybody's like, oh my God, you're trying to Americanize the game. They did it at the Women's World Cup. It was fine. It didn't, like I said, you didn't look at the Women's World Cup, watch that, and be like, oh my God, I'm never watching this because they make announcements by VAR into this. People will complain about it because it's not Europe and Europe isn't doing it, so we shouldn't do it. It doesn't mean it.
Oh yeah.
Secondly,
Sorry, I
Go
was just
ahead.
gonna say, if this is Europe, they would be applauding it. Oh wow, this is great. They really care about their fans. This is an incredible thing for them to do. But if it's, like you said, if it's MLS that does it, they're just trying to Americanize the sport.
Well, it's just really funny, and we'll take a wider approach to this, that the sin bin rule that's been used in literally every English grassroots and is about to go into the Premier League next year. It gets mentioned that MLS is gonna be the first league to do it, and we're automatically an unserious league again. It's like this is literally a European direct. Like the Europeans decided this was something we should do, and we just start in February. Like, get over yourself. Anyways, clock going into stoppage time, massive dub. It was insane when we were at the playoff game, not knowing how much longer we needed to hold on or how much time we would get to get one back. When the ball went out for the corner before that whole confusing thing in the Red Bull game, I had no idea how much time had elapsed. I didn't know if we were 14 minutes over time. I didn't know if we had just started stoppage time. Like, that's how crazy it is in the stadium. So having that clock go would be so good.
You know what I would say? It just feels weird that these things weren't already introduced. Like
Right?
these feel like really basic things to improve the quality of actually being at a game. It's like I think, you and I probably take a lot for granted when we're just watching at home. Like you get the clock, you get all of the commentary on VAR decisions. You probably get they bring in the former referee that tells you about his opinion on the VAR decisions. So like you're very well informed. But I feel like when you're at the game, and I get it to some extent, you just want to be in the immersion at the game, just listen to the sound crowd and all of that. But you're kind of left in the dark. And I'm glad that they're like adding in these little quality of life things for people that are actually attending the games in person.
Yeah, and that's what it's all about. Like the viewers at home, they've got the clock running next to in the graphic at the stadium. You're right. I'm surprised that they didn't have it already. Moving on to the injury rule, I really like this. Maybe your soccer purists who don't want the sin bin or whatever think it's too progressive anyway because that's how the game has always been played. Whatever. I think it's great. This avoids the long rolling around, time wasting, um, all that stuff that people give football crap for anyway. And if they choose to do it, they're punished for it. So I think it's a big win. I like this.
No, I agree too. I think it's good that we're prioritizing focusing on people who, in the case that they're actually injured, that we're actually like giving them proper medical attention. And, I know obviously like the head injuries are very important and, they have already protocols in there for that. But I think it's almost just as important if someone goes down with like a serious leg injury or knee injury that they get the attention that they need. It shouldn't take like the ball going out of play for someone who just tore their ACL. They like get checked out. Like that seems a little bit ridiculous. So I'm glad they added this in. And to your point before, if someone wants to time waste and fake an injury for 15 seconds, they then have to sit out on the sideline for 2 minutes. So it's a net loss for them in that case. And it's still a 15-second period. So it's not like you go down for 5 seconds, you're like stopping a team that's on the break. Like they will have time to still finish their attack. And who knows what the referees are even going to do. I'm sure, they're not timing it to the exact 15 seconds. Like I'm sure they're going to be like giving it a rough guesstimate.
Well, I'm sure the VAR is probably going to have a clock on it.
That's true.
You know, that's why you have all those eyes anyway. But either way, big win. I like the time sub rule too. Speedy changes, keep the game flowing, prevent the silly time wasting for the, oh, I'm just gonna, I'm standing at the corner of the field. I'm gonna jog all the way across
Yeah.
at the slowest pace ever. Maybe get a yellow. Maybe the referee walks by and laughs with me as we're jogging away. You know, I like this one. I'm a big fan of this whole. You gotta do what you can to stop this, and it's proven effective in MLS Next Pro. It'll be effective here.
Yeah, I just don't see how anybody could be upset with a rule like that. Like, how much are you gaining by watching a player just stroll off the field, give everybody a hug and a high five, and he gives his little jog every once in a while just to make the ref happy and make it look like he's moving at a little bit of a quicker pace. It just sucks. Like, it just kills the momentum of the game just to watch someone like just putz around on the field for 30 seconds before they get off.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm on board with you there.
The only one I'm a little cautious about is this same reentry rule. On paper, great. make sure that they're treated, make sure that they've got proper, attention, whatever. But here's a scenario that I can see where it can get a little manipulated. You're up a goal, 5 minutes to go. You're absorbing pressure, you're trying to see out a game. Maybe it's a playoff game. You play with three center backs, and one of them just went up with a header with their only striker. They play with a lone striker. He's the only one who can win a ball in the air. They knock heads. They're both out. Striker comes off the field, gets treated. He's ready to go. But they don't have any subs left. So now you're telling your doctor, hey, take a little bit extra time with our center back. Make sure he's got really, really clear. I want to make sure he's very, very safe. And now it's, 30 seconds left in the game. The ball's held off in the corner. They're like, okay, now we're good to go. So I could see that being a little bit manipulative, but at the end of the day, I do like that they're trying to avoid the whole, okay, he's out, their center back is out, take him off, look at him really quick. Okay, he doesn't look like he's about to pass out, throw him back on the field, right? You're taking the time to properly look at it.
Yeah, no, there's good and bad to this one, I think, too. I think it's good that it's not like a race anymore to get someone out to try to get the advantage. It's a head injury. It's very serious. They should definitely take it seriously. But to your exact point, I feel like it feels a little bit like you could manipulate the rule a little bit. Like, what if you're, the one that jumped up and you initiated the contact, you hit someone else's head, you both have the head injury, you come off, and it's now like, okay, you were the player that did not initiate, but you were cleared like pretty quickly. The other guy who initiated the contact is now like out for a couple minutes. Now you're stuck on the sideline, even though you did absolutely nothing. Like, I just don't think, even that's not like necessarily intentional, but it just doesn't feel very fair. I didn't even think about the intentional factor of it until you mentioned it, but that's a great point as well.
Yeah, I'm a cynic. What can I say? All right.
We'll do anything to win, so it's a
Yeah.
valid cynicism.
All right. Let's get into the tough conversation. On Friday night, MLS made an announcement that all first teams from MLS will be required to bypass and withdraw from the US Open Cup and send their reserve teams there instead. The backlash by this decision is something that Don Garber has been trying to do since day one. It united anti-MLS Euro snobs, anti-MLS USMNT dweebs, and MLS diehard lifers into one unifying message. This decision sucks. As we continue on with this conversation, it is important to ask the questions and rationalize the decision best we can in order to avoid pitchforks and torches in the street, which is kind of what's going on Twitter right now. I think it's important to talk about the history and understand that this decision isn't completely unprecedented. In the intro, I mentioned that it was almost unprecedented. In the 1920s, the ASL were considered one of the best leagues in the world, the American Soccer League. They were recruiting players from all over Europe to play in their league, to the point where they were getting European leagues so angry that they were stealing their players away that they had FIFA go and try and sanction the ASL for stealing players. How dare an American league be able to recruit? I know. They cited schedule congestion and pulled out of the National Challengers Cup, which is that time's version of the US Open Cup, and they barred any team from the ASL from entering. In response, a few teams split from that decision. Bethlehem Steel, the New York Giants, and the Newark Skeeters. They decided to enter anyway because they wanted to play. They thought it was a good time. They were suspended from the league and hit with a $1,000 fine. That time's version of the USSF, the USFA, suspended the entire league at that point because they were trying to put the pieces back together. Nobody was budging, so they said, screw it, you're all done. They kickstarted what was known as the Soccer Wars. They tried to play with less teams, putting them at economic disadvantage, and along with the Great Depression, eventually caused the league itself to fold. There were some spin-off leagues, the Eastern Soccer League and the some other leagues that I am blanking on names at the moment, that tried to pop up and play as kind of what are called outlaw leagues. But they never lasted. Of course, they didn't have the financial backing or the support from the federation. So now 100 years later, we find ourselves at a similar crossroads with decisions to make. Connor, I want to ask you first, what do you think is the driving decision behind, or the driving force behind the decision?
So before I get into that, what I want to say is we should have never been in this position to start with. And maybe to your point earlier, maybe we shouldn't be necessarily tagging this to Messi's arrival, but this is exactly why you expand your TAM spending so that teams have the depth to continue to play in multiple competitions. Because when you look at all the factors at play, in my opinion, I think it makes sense why MLS chose the US Open Cup to be the competition that they backed out of, as opposed to Leagues Cup. I know that there's great history with it, it's the longest competition and all that, but I was reading the article by Jeff Reuter, and there's a quote in there from the MLS Players Association executive director Bob Foose, and he said that the US Open Cup is certainly not something that our players look forward to. He said MLS Players Association hasn't taken a formal position on the US Open Cup, but he says that his personal opinion is that it's not at the level of our players should be playing at. The venues aren't there, the facilities aren't there, and he says that the structure of the tournament isn't contributing to making MLS a better league. And I understand where he's coming from, honestly. Like, I feel like the facilities definitely are not, certainly not at the level that like MLS players are used to playing at. If it's true that the players don't look forward to playing in it, then I think that's definitely another factor. I mean, we've seen a number of times in the early rounds of the tournament, teams don't usually even play their starters anyway. It's usually like the quarterfinals where they maybe start to put their starters in. The prize money for the US Open Cup when comparing to the Leagues Cup is pretty poor. And even the production value isn't very good. I mean, I remember you telling me about the stream that you were watching. Was it Flower City? I can't remember exactly, but it was a train wreck.
The Flower City Loudon game where there was a cut in the middle and you had two halves.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's a train wreck. So I don't, I'm definitely not happy to see them backing out of the US Open Cup. I think this could have been prevented with proper changes to the roster rules to give them more money to spend on depth so that you don't have a situation like LAFC this year where they've played 53 competitive games in 2023, which is outrageous. But once they made the decision not to change the roster rules, I understand why they would choose the US Open Cup as I'll call it sacrificial lamb here.
I will start off this entire thing. This might take a little bit. I will start this entire thing by saying I think this is the worst decision from we do a lot of history on the podcast. From a football historical outlook, it is the worst decision possibly in 100 years, in a century, when it applies to U.S. football. That being said, you can be very, very upset with a decision and also be able to rationalize why the decision was made and understand, which is where I think you're coming from. I'm very, very aligned with yours, and I still think it's a terrible decision, but it doesn't shock me. And here's where I'll go into this, right? Don Garber cited a few things that I think are worth bringing up. Firstly, the schedule congestion, right? A problem that everybody all over the world is facing because they want more money in their pockets. And by doing that, you got to trot out your teams for more games. We know this. It's a bad system because the depth is not there, as you just mentioned. Secondly, the quality of play and the conditions, stating that it is not a product that he wants the world to see and that he wasn't sad about the small audiences. Following up, saying that he was committed to working with the USSF and USL and all these leagues to find the best possible solution for the competition. And apparently this was his idea of the best. Let's all be real. We know what this was driven by, and that is money. MLS requires money to operate, and they have a projection going out 5+ years with every decision they make, or at least they should, because that's how businesses should be run. You should have contingency plans and understanding about how your financial impact will be made with decisions that you're thinking about making, right? You don't just make decisions out on a whim and say, let's try it later. We'll see what happens. Not this business. They knew that the decision to cut the USOC was not just a schedule issue because Leagues Cup is sitting right there. And for most teams, It's a heck of a lot more games in a much shorter time. This is we're clearing the schedule by cutting the thing that makes us the least. It shouldn't be a shock to anybody. You can be outraged. You can be angry. You can be upset. Nobody's saying you shouldn't be. But if you're shocked, that's a problem to me.
You know what I wonder about this is, you know, obviously a lot of people, and obviously it's big for us as well. We have a whole like segment on MLS history, and we've already talked a number of stories about the US Open Cup.
Absolutely.
But I wonder how many fans following MLS nowadays have any tie to the US Open Cup. Like you talk about the early days, like the coffee pot game and all of that, and I'm sure that has made fans, and it's probably a very memorable thing for a lot of people. But if you're like an Atlanta fan, let's just say, like that's a team that won the US Open Cup. And I don't think that many fans, when thinking back on like the most memorable moments for Atlanta, I'm not sure many of them would that's something that would jump to their mind right away. Like obviously they're gonna think MLS Cup. That's probably the first thing that they'll ever think of. They might think of like some massive wins like the snow game in Minnesota. I just don't think that teams nowadays, and this is maybe a product of how little MLS has cared about the US Open Cup lately. I just don't think they've built a lot of history and connection to the US Open Cup. I think the veterans who've been following the league for a while definitely have a lot of history and connection with the cup. And I totally understand that. I mean, we've been covering the history. I think it's obvious when you look back at the history, like how and why they have that connection. But I just don't think that connection is as easily built with the newer teams and the newer fans following the league.
It's like you're reading my notes here because my next line before you ridiculously cut me off.
Sorry.
U.S. Open Cup brings in usually less than 5,000 fans a game. Why? Because it's played on a weekday and it's kind of shoehorned in there. Whatever, you can find out why. But the history of the competition is not understood, and therefore it's not appreciated by MLS fans. Why? Well, we're 30 years old. Most of us are first or second generation soccer fans, right? This is I had to bring my dad into football. I don't know if your dad or mother or grandfather.
It's a very long working process right now.
Well, and that's my point, right? The reason why the FA Cup, Copa del Rey, the Italian Cup, I don't really know the name of it. I'm
The
sorry.
German Super Cup.
The
I don't know
German,
if that's the right one.
the DFK
Yeah,
Pokal, right?
yeah.
Why are those so important? Because the parents of the kids can tell them the stories of that night in Munich, right? That night in, Goodison Park, whatever. That history has been passed down. But in the American model, when you have things coming up the way that they are, and the constant ebb and flow of teams in certain areas, not to mention the massive size of the country, and how you can realistically I'll use the term re-up a team in a area that is close enough to a city, but it doesn't have that same tie. Excuse me. It doesn't have that same tie as a team that's been around for 100 years and gone through 100 years of this competition. Even the teams that were, it's a 100-year competition. Very few, if any, teams have actually played in this competition for 100 years, and very few, if any of them, have had a direct line to anything past the last 30 years. So, for that reason and that reason only, it's not appreciated by the fans. And you're 100% right. And this is, and again, I don't like to tip my hat to these people. The people who complain about the way that the American soccer pyramid kills teams or teams don't survive or whatever, the reasons that they have for those teams not being around are usually pretty bad. The consequence of that is this. So tie all the insert the "It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia" thing with the board and the crazy guy pointing at it. You can tie anything you want to this because that's the way numbers and facts work. But that to me is one of the reasons why this competition is so misunderstood or underappreciated, is because that there hasn't been a team that's constantly gone through this for the last 100 years. Just the way it is. Is it good? No. Am I happy about it? No. Is it a fact? Yeah. And we can choose to live with the fact and move on, find different ways to fix it, because we have to find different ways around everything. Or we can yell, scream on Twitter, and do nothing about it. So at the end of the day, the board came in and said, yep, we need to pick a competition to cut so we can lower our impact on the player's schedule. And we're going to go with USOC because the money made in Leagues Cup will help us make the desired changes in 2027 and beyond. If they come out and say that in a statement, instead of just saying, hey, by the way, we're not sending our teams, I don't think a ton of people are going to be happy, but they'll at least have some understanding of why the decision was made. Because we all know that's why the decision was made. But goodness me, just like not saying it makes you look shady. And that's what I think the biggest issue is. People are upset because the history isn't preserved and whatever. And somebody came out and said, yeah, well, American and MLS soccer Twitter isn't the entire world. And they might have a point. We'll get to that in a little bit. But here's the deal. And this is going to be my big point for this, and the reason why I still think that they shouldn't have made this decision. There was a quote from the MLSPA president, and I think you mentioned it already, about how it's not a good look for MLS, or MLS players don't like playing in it, blah, 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 blah. Newsflash to anybody who is following that logic. The US Open Cup is not made to make MLS or MLS players happy or better. It was here long before MLS was here. It existed long before we were even a thought. It isn't here to make the league better. That is not its sole goal. It gives so much money and attention to lower leagues that are already on their own, have to find ways to fend for themselves. The only chance to prove that they can compete with the best, and they've pulled it out and ruined it. Some notes on the numbers of that. I'm sorry, I'm going on a rant here, but this is something I really, really am passionate about in this conversation. I think it was the Birmingham Legion who came out and said their highest league ticket sale in 2022 was like 10K for a 20K stadium, whatever. When their MLS opponent came to play them in the US Open Cup, 18,000 tickets. They went and nearly doubled their ticket sales for a single game because of this. The amount of gate money, that alone, is massive for these types of clubs. The fact that they don't get to work with this is a problem. I'm going to finish by saying that, again, I 100% understand that MLS is not responsible for the growth of anything except itself. It's not supposed to grow USL. It's not supposed to grow US soccer. That's how this system works. It is a business, and the business had one job, and that was to survive. Don't make mistakes, survive. And I get the point of it, and I can rationalize it, and I can understand it. But at some point, there needs to be an understanding that history and tradition within the world of US soccer is such an important part of growing the game. If you continue to make decisions like this, where you can't set down a foundation to build history, you will never grow the game more than just a bunch of people pointing and saying, oh, this is a retirement league, the blah, 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 right? I'm going to take an approach that is a little bit positive, because I don't like living in a negative mindset. I try not to. I think that this is the league who came out and said that the quality is bad, the tournament's bad, blah, 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 blah. I think this is them trying to strong arm a message to the federation to say, put more resources into sponsorship, production, make it worth our while, and we'll come back. I think it's a terrible way to do it, because I think you can influence that change without pulling out of it and jeopardizing the entire cup in and of itself. You have the resources as a league with damn near 30 clubs now to put some of it back in to make it worth your while. But you're not you're walking away from it because you're worried about yourself and you're not worried about the history and foundation, all the things we just talked about. I find it massively disappointing. End rant for part.
I guess my question for you is, you mentioned it, like obviously MLS is its own entity. There's no pro rel, so there's not like a link. The only link between USL and MLS prior to this was the US Open Cup, and just the fact that they're both leagues in the US. I guess what would be the incentive for MLS to help build these other league, like help build the USL league? What's the incentive there for them?
You're right. There is no incentive, and I'm not saying that they need to do it to build USL. What I'm saying is that they should do it because 100 years ago they tried not to. The first division tried not to do it, and we lost football in this country for I think a decade, maybe two, before NASL start, before all the USISL. There's a league there that I'm missing. I'm mixing up the names because there are so many of them. But for years we went without it because it started the soccer wars, and this is something I'm actually really excited to read up on at some point because it's a very, very interesting part in U.S. soccer history. But 100 years ago, this happened, and it put us in a massive hole. Yes, the Great Depression played a part in that, but there's a history here that I truly, truly feel outweighs, and I think a lot of people feel it outweighs money. That being said, I don't know what the MLS accountant books look like. I don't know what they're swimming. I don't know what they're trying to figure out. But I really, really am disappointed with it because instead of trying to find the solution, they just turned their back and said good luck, which I think is a really bad, it's a bad message to send to the world when your league doesn't even care about the history that it's trying to shoehorn itself into. US Open Cup and leagues existed well before MLS, and there are teams that have existed for that time. Not many, but there are. And the fact that MLS is sitting there saying, "Oh, it doesn't do any good for me, so I'm not going to do it," is a slap in the face to what has gone on the last 100 years in this country to get to a point where MLS is. And that's what disappoints me is it's a short-sighted me before we viewpoint that I think is detrimental to the growth of the game. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely a me before we move. I think they are focusing on themselves and their own competitions. I think they probably saw how teams in MLS would play very rotated squads for at least a round or two. It doesn't seem like they were just committed to playing the tournament. You have the MLSPA coming out and saying that our players don't like playing in this level of competition. I mean, from a me perspective, I'm not saying that as in myself. I mean, from the me or we argument, from the me perspective, everything was saying this competition would be cut because it just doesn't seem like teams want to be there, or it doesn't seem like owners want to be there. It doesn't seem like players want to be there. So if they were going to cut a competition, it seems obvious that this would be the one versus Leagues Cup, who, and I'm sure, a lot of that was definitely very messy dependent. Like him coming in and playing and starting in Leagues Cup and having that run absolutely put way more eyes on that competition than would have happened if Messi was not there. But regardless, that competition, even outside of just Messi, we talked about it, we recapped it. It was so much fun. I thought the structure was really good. The level of competition was great. Teams were playing starters. It was competitive. Liga MX teams are like the level of competition that I would see MLS teams competing against if you want if you want MLS teams to play their best. And the prize money was way more worthwhile for teams to actually try and not just like send out a rotated squad to make sure that their guys don't get hurt. Like my concern if MLS stayed in it is that, we talk about like the history of it and creating this history and having stories to tell, like to pass on, to create these lifelong fans. I just feel like the way that MLS treated US Open Cup previously, you weren't going to get those stories. Like I can't see an Inter Miami going into round 3 and round 4 of the US Open Cup, there's almost 0% chance that Messi, Suarez, Busquets, Alba, any of those guys are playing in those games. So I just don't see how like any person who just hopped over to follow the league because Messi came over is gonna care about the US Open Cup, because they're gonna look and they're gonna be like, oh, we're just playing backups, like Messi's not playing, none of these big names are playing. This must just like must not matter. Like, I'm not gonna follow it. I don't really care. It's not like when teams play the FA Cup in England, like, maybe the earlier rounds, if they're playing like the lower level competition, they maybe they play like a more rotated squad, but I think they get to a point where they're playing, like, even if they're playing, like, if once they start playing against, maybe championship teams or other Premier League teams, you see the higher level quality player come out, and it's not just like the youth academy guys that are out there. But I feel like with the US Open Cup, even if an MLS team was playing another MLS team in like round 4, you'd still see rotated squads. I mean, some of them cared more than others, but I just think there would be a hard time creating that history if teams and players didn't care about the competition.
Here's the thing. For the majority of teams, they played their backups anyway. They played their MLS Next Pro guys anyway. Why come out and make a PR statement that mandates you do it and put yourself all the work that you've done in the last 2 years? I mean, we've been doing this now 4 seasons, nearly 3 or 4 years, and all we've seen are positive steps from. People are upset. People are always going to be upset because it's not Europe. It doesn't, but whatever. But you've done so much work to get to this point. And now all of a sudden you're like, pop, there it goes. There are so many other ways. Jimmy Conrad put out such a good tweet about the different ways you could have handled this. Roster rule changes you've mentioned, allowing teams to dictate things on their own, putting in actual resources to make the tournament better. And multiple different pathways you could have gone. And this is why I think a lot of people are upset about it, because instead of putting the work in to preserve the history, MLS turned its back. It's a gravely, that's probably not the right word. It's a massive, massive bad look. That's the way I'll put it. But with this bad look comes the fallout. I want to ask you what you think is the best case and the worst case scenario for this fallout. We've already kind of talked about the lower league clubs and how that would affect them. But I kind of want to know if you see anything else coming.
I mean, I think the best case scenario, it's a wake up call for USSF, and they make great improvements to the US Open Cup. They improve the production, they improve the facilities, and I believe in the article, MLS said they would reconsider in the next following year. Best case scenario, they come right back and we get an increased, level to the competition from all perspectives, from every league and participant in there. I think, honestly, I don't see a situation where MLS is really getting hurt that much here. I think people will be upset, but I think inevitably I feel like people will end up getting over it at some point, whether that's right or wrong. I just do. I think people will, the season will start, things will happen, and people will turn their focus onto other things, the regular season, the league's cup, the playoffs. I guess worst case scenario is that they never go back to the US Open Cup and the cup folds. That's probably the worst case scenario. I don't know how much of a reality that is, but I would definitely see that as the worst case scenario. But I don't see MLS like, I don't think MLS will go into turmoil because they dropped out of the US Open Cup.
Do have a bit of a disagreement with that. It kind of goes back to the roster rules thing that we were talking about, where MLS Twitter, US men's national team Twitter, anti-MLS Twitter, it's not really the fan base that they're desiring to capture, right? The family of 5 with 2 of their buddies who are looking for something to do on their off weekend of club play, who don't know anything about the cup, is probably what their target is. So when you mention that they're not going to get hurt, I think the majority of it is relatively True. Again, they don't make this decision if they send out a company to say, hey, what would happen if MLS, pulled out, and 99 of 100 people said that they're going to never go to an MLS game again. They don't make that decision because the numbers aren't in their favor. What I will say is that MLS is hurting their own fan base, however small it may be on Twitter, where I'm seeing people cancel MLS season pass. There are supporters groups who are calling for the boycott of Leagues Cup matches. People are saying that, they're not even going to go to MLS games, people who had canceled season tickets. I mean, again, MLS Twitter doesn't make up the average MLS fan. It's probably about 10% of what you'll see. But that being said, if the difference between making a non-existent financial change to your roster rule is a few million gam tam and it's too much to make without risking something, 10% of a league right now can really hit home. It can really, really dig deep, I guess, for lack of a better term. And the problem is that the people who aren't going are your most loyal supporters. If those guys leave, and gals, you're left with the show up for one game a year, 2 games a year crowd. Your ticket sales are going to drop. Your merch sales are going to drop. People are going to go onto Twitter. And if somebody asks, I get questions, posted in chats and all the time, looking to go to my first game, like, where do I sit? Where should I park? What should I look forward to do? If you've got a whole thing saying don't go, it's not worth it, maybe he doesn't go, right? And that changes a lot year over year. You're going to feel this in all areas for a long time. There's a tweet that was put out, and I really didn't like it, that the idea of the cup and not the cup itself was what was drawing all the outrage. And you mentioned it where the connection really isn't there for the average MLS fan, and I don't disagree with you. But everybody's looking at this from an MLS only point of view when they're making these tweets and when they're making these comments. People being mad at things changing are probably never, they've never sat through a stream that's, second division versus third division on a stream that's got a bar down the middle and it freezes every time it goes over so it can transfer. They haven't sat through that. They probably haven't been to an Open Cup game where you had to go to, Montclair State and sit in a crowd of 3,000 people to support Red Bull versus DC. They probably didn't care about it at all, as you've mentioned before. But this isn't about MLS. It's so much deeper than MLS. It's not an MLS sanctioned cup. It's the country's cup. It's about bringing the game up along all levels, not just the top. And I know you asked about the incentive, but I think it is doing, as much as it's not hurting the average MLS fan, the PR hit and the amount of, your average MLS fan goes on Twitter for the most part. They go on Facebook. If this PR hit trickles out of your diehards and gets into the casuals and they're saying, oh man, everybody's really upset, I should look into this, and they realize they just turned their back on 100 years worth of history, it's not a good look and it's not a good outlook, in my opinion. But that's just,
I'm gonna disagree with your disagreement
okay.
because I think the average MLS fan knows very little about the US Open Cup. I think they go to games because they have a good time and it's enjoyment, it's entertainment. That's at the end of the day, like that's what sports is. It's an entertainment industry. It's to go there for people to have a good time, be with friends. I don't think I don't think hardcore fans getting upset about them leaving the US Open Cup is going to drastically drop attendances at games. I think there's probably been a lot of like very instant reactions when this came out, and I would be very curious to see what people think once we get to like the start of the season again. Like if they're still on that like that belief that, I'm not going to support the league until they, make a difference in this decision or reverse this decision, have a change of heart on this. I would be very curious to see, how much of that sentiment still is in place by the time we get to the start of the season, because That's 2 months from now. A lot of things can change in between that time. I'm sure there's going to be some people that still are very like adamant people, and they will truly like go along with, hey, I'm not subscribing to Apple. I'm not going to any games. Like, I won't support this until you reverse this decision. I just don't think the average fan is going to be affected by that this much. I don't think there's going to be too much of a trickle from the diehards into the casual fans. I mean, could I see a scenario where, attendances definitely dip, especially like a little bit at the start of the season? I could see that. But I just don't think it's a situation where like you're going to have thousands of people less per game in the season because they dropped out of US Open Cup. Like, if you're the casual Messi fan that just came over and followed Messi, they don't know anything about the US Open Cup. They probably, I mean, at this point, considering MLS isn't even in the competition anymore, they're never probably going to know about US Open Cup. Um, so I don't think many people are going to be impacted by it too much. And maybe I'm looking at it from the wrong way. I'm definitely open to, I know you have an opposing opinion on it, so I'd definitely like to hear what you say on it. But maybe it's being pessimistic. I just don't think that people are going to care too much about it once like the start of the season comes around. The diehards, like you're a diehard fan, like you are not the casual fan of MLS. You know way too much, especially about Red Bull. Way too much about Red Bull. Um, and I just don't think like the casual Red Bull fan would just like completely, abandon the team and merchandise and games because of this decision.
I'm just trying to scroll through Twitter here. I think it's been 2 days since the announcement's been made, and I think you are seeing those, you know, oh, this might not actually be the worst thing in the world for the advancement of MLS. And, those people are starting to creep out. They're still being met with relative pushback as is understandable. Um, it comes down to, in my opinion, individual league success versus history and which one desires more. There's an argument to be made, I do believe, for that tweet that I mentioned before, where people are mad that the idea of the cup isn't happening with MLS teams and not the cup itself. Because as you mentioned, and we've gone through it, right? Not a ton of people showed up, not a ton of people watched on TV because it really wasn't on TV. There is so much that goes into this that we don't have time to talk about it in terms of the marketing, the people in charge of the marketing, the people who are trying to get it into another level, why Apple doesn't have control over it. And does that have there's so much that goes into it. And some of it's kind of tinfoil hat conspiracies, but some of it makes some sense. We won't go into it today, but I do want to talk kind of to wrap this up. Is there a way back from this decision? And I do want to just start off by saying I think there is. And I think it's sooner rather than later, in my opinion. As I mentioned before, that this is being met with a ton of pushback, not just by the anti-MLS, Euro snobs and USMNT dweebs, whatever. But even the diehard faithfuls are coming out saying this isn't a good choice. It's not being defended. MLS gets defended a lot by its diehard fans, and usually that's us. But today and over the last couple of days, that's not been the case. The people who defend it the most have come out and say, you know what? This isn't cool. We understand that the cup means more than just the league, blah, 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 blah. Right. But this is a similar reaction that came from the European Super League idea, right? Everybody pushed back. Oh my God, this is the worst thing ever, blah, 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 blah. They came up with the idea thinking that they would get some sort of support, and instead they got immense hate and pushback from it, and they pulled the idea away altogether. They also had leagues that were threatening sanctions to the teams that were going to leave, right? You'll never play in Europa League again or Champions League, whatever. And both of those are reasons why I think that they can reverse this choice, or at least make it short term. And the first reason is because of the pro league standards. If you want to be a Division I league in the United States, there is a clause that says you have to compete in domestic U.S. competitions, including the U.S. Open Cup. If the U.S. Soccer Federation threatens to remove Division I status from MLS, maybe they rethink their actions. Are they going to do that? I highly doubt it, because I'm sure there's some way that Don Garber comes in and says, yeah, we're going to still play under the same names, but we're just going to use all MLS Next Pro players, which is what was happening anyway. So I don't get why they're doing it. Anyways, on the second hand, MLS needs money. If people are canceling their Apple subscriptions and they're not going to get anything from League Cup, which is the whole comparison that they made, and they're not going to get anything from MLS games and sales and merchandise and all the things that we just went through, they're going to have to backpedal eventually to put teams back in, because they're going to need the money to survive. It was mentioned that MLS is going to reevaluate next year, and that gives me, again, I'll use the term cynic again. The cynic in me believes that there's a quid pro quo behind the scenes, that MLS sat down with U.S. President Cindy, I think it's Cindy Cohn, I think that's her last name, and basically laid out a list of demands saying, this is what you need to do to fix U.S. Open Cup before we even consider rejoining. You'll probably see a massive increase in the U.S. Open Cup quality, and suddenly MLS will come walking back into their life, and everything's all fine and dandy. Now it's worth my time. It's an awful look. But that's how I see this going. I'm not saying it's the right thing that should be happening. I'm not saying it's going to be pretty. And I'm not saying they're going to win any brownie points with anybody who is already kind of skeptical with MLS to begin. But that's the most logical way I see it going, unfortunately.
Well, so if MLS just comes back after the 2024 season, they come back in 2025, and nothing has changed from a U.S. Open Cup perspective or an MLS perspective, then what did they do all this for? Why did they back out in the first place? Why did they create all this outrage? It would be pointless, and it would be extremely stupid from an MLS perspective. I think at this point, unless you're backing out, unless you're reversing your decision before the season starts, I think they have to just commit to it at this point. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily the right decision, but if you're going to make this statement and deal with this backlash, then you have to stick with the decision until the reasons that you backed out are addressed, whether that's internally within MLS, increasing roster spending, or whether that's USSF, increasing the productivity and the quality and the value of the cup. But otherwise, then you did all of this for nothing, and you just created outrage, and you probably hurt a lot of trust from a lot of diehard fans that you probably will never be able to recover. And if you just come back with no changes, then you did it for no reason. So I'm not saying that's necessarily the right way to go, but I think that is the way that they will have to, I feel like, approach this if they're not going to listen to the feedback or the criticisms that fans are giving from this decision.
You want to put on a tinfoil hat here, ready for this one?
Yeah.
This is MLS's way of helping the lower leagues, because
you mentioned that one earlier, but I want to hear you expand on this one, because I'm building my tinfoil hat right now.
My tinfoil hat is on. I'm going to wear it like this, and here's what it sounds like. That looks like I'm deranged. Winner of the Open Cup still has a spot in 2024. If a USL championship or USL 1 team wins and travels to freaking Honduras or whatever to play in the Champions, instant fan support behind that. Oh, rah, 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 the league's great. Influx of money. Money builds stadiums. Money loosens roster rules. Bang, they're instantly up there. And now MLS is like, oh, you're a legitimate second league. Let's talk. All sorts of combined. This is big brain Don Garber coming through in the clutch to fix and save U.S. soccer. That's what this is.
Let me tell you, my friend. Consider this my tinfoil hat. I'm in. I'm in on the conspiracy theory.
I'm telling you, I'm so glad I'm the one who makes the clips, because if somebody clips that out of context, that's a bad look.
I hope someone does clip that out of context.
Me too. Just for the fun of it. I'd love to see
it. You should clip that out of context if I say something stupid.
All right, so here's how I'm gonna end this. Unless you have other points you want to make on some of the things we talked about, I don't want to silence you here. I have talked a lot.
No, I don't think I have anything else to add.
Yeah, I just had so much time to think about this and try and put together my feelings for it, which is
Oh,
why
actually, I will.
you're
I'll
gonna
ask you
cut
this.
me off after you said you had nothing else to say.
Yes, I am. I
Go
am.
ahead.
Um, if you, in your honest opinion, when we get to the start of the season, and I can't remember if it's February or March, um, the start of the regular season, how much of this current outrage against them pulling out of the U.S. Open Cup do you think will still be in play at that point?
If we continue with the information we have right now, tons. I think you see banners. I think you see signs. I think you see shirts. I think you see protests. I think you see all across the board. I don't think it gets past week 2, personally. I think they make their peace. I think they say what they have to say. Those who are going to stick around and watch the team are going to stick around and watch the team. Those who aren't, and we're just going to go about our way. And it's going to die in the news cycle, right? As things usually do. We won't hear another thing about it for, we'll probably get a couple more angry, upset tweets for the next day or two. Christmas is going to come around. Everybody's going to be celebrating their family, and then they're going to come back for New Year's, and they're going to be celebrating with their friends. And come January 2nd, it's back burner stuff because we're into the off season, and the people who do what we are doing are going to continue to do. I don't think anybody's come out and said, I'm not going to do my podcast anymore, or I'm not going to write my articles, or I'm not going to do. They've said they're not going to go to games, which is fair. If you're upset that they've picked one over the other, you're not going to go to those games. But I think you're still going to see fine attendance at regular MLS season games because that's not what they picked over the US Open Cup. In my opinion, I could be completely wrong, and that's okay. But that's what I think is going to happen. I'd like to hear your thoughts.
I think I'm pretty aligned with you. I think most people are going to have a lot of outrage right now. I honestly feel like, from MLS's perspective, if you're Don Garber, you timed it really well. You got it right before the holidays. People are going to go to the holidays. They're going to, a number of people are going to probably forget about it. Obviously not everybody. There's going to be US Open Cup sickos who remember this for a lifetime and will never forget. But I think people will start to forget about it. Transfers are going to come in. People are going to get excited about the team again. And I think, I honestly think people are going to forget about it, I would say, until probably the cup starts up again. And, you get a little bit into the later rounds and there's a bit more news on it going on. And, that might rekindle the fire a little bit. But I think by the time you hit MLS playoffs, I think it'll be old news at that point. And that's not me saying that this is what I want to happen. I think this is what is going to happen.
Totally fair. And I think that's exactly it. You're here. Announcement comes up. You're here. You're max level. Oh my God, this is the worst thing ever. Then you start reading and you think about it and you're like, okay, understand it. Still not happy with it, which is where I'm at. Not happy with it. Think it's a terrible decision. Do understand why the decision was made. Still not happy with it, but not shocked. By the time New Year's comes around, we're down here. MLS is back burner, whatever. New transfers are coming in. Ooh, my team's getting good. Ooh, my team's looking exciting. Emil Forsberg through the door. New coach through the door. We're linked to Jamiro Montero. Awesome. I've got so much hype for this season coming up. As we come up to Champions League, people are going to watch some of the Champions League games, which also people don't throw a fit about the Champions League, even though the amount of sketchy streams I had to find when Red Bull were playing in this Champions League. Nobody throws a fit about that. Anyways, you'll get to there. You'll have a few people like, oh yeah, like just remember the person who's playing in this won the US Open Cup, and that's not happening anymore. Then people will be like, oh, and then we'll take a drop down, and then we'll be like a week before season starts, and everybody's be like, don't forget that we're still angry about this, and everybody's gonna come up, they're gonna do their protest, whatever, and then 2 weeks in, they'll probably do maybe there'll be a walkout, maybe there'll be a protest of going to game. whatever it may be. It'll be different for each individual club. But at the end of the day, it won't go as deep as possible because, as we've mentioned, the meaning of the cup doesn't hit as deep for people who are just joining the league recently. It's just the way it is. We aren't agreeing with it. We aren't saying it's the right thing to do, or if it's we're not saying we're happy about it. We are accepting reality and moving forward. I do not believe this is a decision that should have been made. I do not believe that this is a decision that is a good decision for a lot of things. There were different ways to change this schedule congestion or lessen games on your team. They chose the wrong one. People make mistakes. It happens. They can come back from it. But here's what I'll say, and this is how I'll end my little soapbox episode here. I don't trash this league often. I'm usually one of its biggest supporters and defenders. Have been for years. Back in the days when I won't name drop him on the pod, but I'll tell you when we're done recording. Anytime I would tweet about the Red Bulls, he'd be in my comments telling me nobody cares, and I would defend it every day until I blocked the kid. Move forward. It's now turned into something we talk about weekly. It's turned into something we've developed a really, really big appreciation for, as have a lot of people. But I will say that when you put a bunch of owners of NFL and MLB teams in a league that's designed to provide a service and make them money in the process, this is the stuff that you're going to get. The lack of cultural understanding of the history of this cup, the thought that all the soccer in the world is meant to benefit MLS in some way, shape, or form, and the decisions that are made strictly in their own interest. That's what you get when you have these owners. On the flip side, we aren't even in this position if we don't have those owners. So it is a 50-50, pick your poison, right? You can hate a decision and understand why it's made, and that's where I'm at. But I do truly hope there's a fix to this problem, which involves improvements to the competition, improvements to a whole bunch of different aspects. Because this competition is truly a unique experience for the entire country. It connects every level of player and allows for amazing opportunities, stories, experiences, and historical moments, as we've shown in MLS History Retold. But at the end of the day, the bottom line is the cup is for the betterment of the game in this country, not the top league in the country. And it's a me versus we decision, and they've picked me. And it's a bad look overall, especially when you are a league that has asked people for the first 15 years of its existence to watch some of the most garbage soccer in the world on some of the most garbage fields in the world. And bear with us, it's going to get better, we promise. And now you're walking away because your guys are playing on bad fields or in bad streaming conditions. It's like a, what have you done for me lately? Look at where I am now without remembering where you came from. It's a bad look. It's a bad PR move. I'm disappointed with it, and I hope there's a fix soon. That's where I'll end my talk.
I tip my tinfoil hat to you, sir. Very good way to sum it up.
Is there anything else you want to add to that?
No. We should wrap it up because if we're getting this out on Monday, I need some time to edit.
Connor complaining about not getting enough sleep before work. Why? Like, go back to grad school and pick your hours. All right, y'all. Thanks so much for listening. Please let us know your thoughts. We'd love to communicate with this because I think there's a good dialogue and conversation to have here about this because you've got people who are on tons of different areas of this spectrum where we can all kind of understand where each other are coming from. And I think it's a really good discourse to have. So please make sure you're commenting and sharing. Make sure you follow us wherever you get your podcasts. So you know when our next episode goes live, the last, hopefully, episode of season 4, as long as MLS doesn't MLS things up again. If they are just going to stay dormant, that will be the last episode. It will be an MLS Cup recap. It was supposed to be on Wednesday, and then we ran out of time. And it was supposed to be on Monday, and then we had to do this. So hopefully next Wednesday will be the time to do that. Make sure you're following us on social media: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube. That's where we post all of our clips, and you can kind of get a better conversation with us. Until then, we'll catch you on episode 202. See ya.